Let's bring in emergency medicine physician, Dr. Anand Swaminathan. Dr. Swaminathan, VRBPAC meeting today to discuss Johnson & Johnson's application for emergency use authorization. This is a big one. They are widely expected to vote in favor of it. But what in particular are you looking for? What do you want to hear about this vaccine today and over the weekend as the FDA potentially considers it?
The data that's been released is actually very positive. And I think we've heard a lot of back and forth about the numbers being a little bit less than the Moderna and the Pfizer. But I think the things that we have to stress is we're talking about almost a 90%, 86% reduction in severe infection and no deaths. So we have to keep it really simple. This is a shot that can turn COVID, something that everybody's afraid of, that is killing people, into the common cold. That's what we're talking about. Yes, you might get a minimal infection, but you're not going to get very sick. You're not going to need hospitalization. You're not going to die. And that is a huge win, especially when we look at the fact that this is one shot and it can be stored in a fridge for up to 3 months. That means that we can get it to places that otherwise we've been having a hard time getting to. So this is a huge win, and we really have to play up the zero number, which is 0 deaths with this vaccination.
Yeah. Yeah, Heidi Prisbilla was saying that earlier. I mean, that is certainly a compelling argument. You might get mildly sick, but you're not going to die. I mean, sign me up for that, right? It just is a really strong argument. Dr. Fauci today was encouraging Americans just not to wait to get a vaccine. Here he is.
Right now, get vaccinated. The vaccine that's available to you, get that vaccine. It is important to get as many people vaccinated as quickly and as expeditiously as possible.
So what should people know about the differences between the 2 and hopefully soon 3 vaccines, Pfizer, Moderna, and potentially J&J? And what is your advice for people who right now prefer to get one over the other?
I think, again, the bottom line is that all 3 of these vaccinations are going to lead to no deaths. The no deaths in the arm that got a vaccination, whether it be the Pfizer, the Moderna, or the J&J. That's the thing that we need to stress over and over again. And the best shot is the one that you can get in your arm. So we shouldn't be waiting. If we want to get towards herd immunity, if we want to get to a place where we can start seeing our family again, get what's available. And yes, the J&J is going to be a little bit more delayed in getting up to the numbers that we need, but it's going to be a huge win in supplementing our supply of all the different vaccines. And I think what I have told people over and over again, and I think what most healthcare professionals are telling people, is get whatever vaccine is available to you. Don't be nitpicky, just get what you can get.
Andy Slavitt from the White House COVID response team is asking businesses to get involved by giving workers incentives to go get vaccinated. What do you think of that strategy? Effective?
I think it's an interesting thing, whether it be monetary or something else is up for question. And some people have said this might raise skepticism for those who are already skeptical. I'm not sure that that really comes into play, but it doesn't have to be a monetary bonus. Things that are simple that businesses should be doing is supporting people and taking time off to get a vaccine, paying for travel expenses to get a vaccine. And then as the supply increases, let's look at some other things that we can do. How about turning work sites into vaccination sites, not just for your workers, but for the community in general? And we have some very large businesses that could do this. And that would be a huge boon and would really message to your workers as well as the community that you think that this is safe, it's effective, and it's what we need to do. And then once the supply is really enough, how about an opt-out strategy for people who work in a business? You're going to be scheduled for a vaccine appointment, and then you can choose to unschedule that. We know this is cognitive psychology. We know that if you schedule people for it and don't make them do it, there's going to be a much higher uptake. So how about an opt-out approach to this? Right. There's a lot of ways that businesses can really help out here.
CDC Director Dr. Walensky said today that COVID cases are ticking up again. Both she and Dr. Fauci are saying that we need to be careful or we could see another surge. Take a listen.
Cases have been increasing for the past 3 days compared to the prior week. And while deaths tend to fluctuate more than cases and hospital admissions, the most recent 7-day average, approximately 2,000 per day, is slightly higher than the 7-day average earlier in the week.
If we plateau at 70,000, we are at that very precarious position that we were right before the fall surge, where anything that could perturb that could give us another surge. We don't want to be people always looking at the dark side of things, but you want to be realistic.
Are you worried about another surge this spring or this summer, especially with more new variants popping up?
I think we have to be worried about this. And that leveling off of cases is a big indicator that we have to be more worried as the variants start to creep in and are spreading throughout. And what we're seeing is we're hearing about a lot of governors that are loosening restrictions. And this is not the time to spike the ball. You know, we say don't spike the ball on the 2-yard line. This is spiking the ball at the 50. We can't be repealing mask mandates. We have to keep up with good public health. Keep the masks on. Keep distance. And one of the big problems is with the economy and people talking about reopening businesses. We have to be very careful about this. And we also have to be ready to shut down again or to repeal or reinstate restrictions if that's what's necessary as numbers go up. But we can't be celebrating. This is not the time for us to say that we have won, that this is over. The declining rates are great, but as we see that plateau, we really have to be careful. Another spike again could really destroy us. And as we see these vaccines get to us, the supply increasing, seeing another surge now would really be heartbreaking.
Joining me now is Dr. Anthony Fauci. He's, of course, the director of the National Institute for Allergy and Infectious Diseases. Dr. Fauci, welcome back to Meet the Press. I want to start with the message that you and Dr. Walensky were sending on Friday, because I want to put up, we had quite a few states started lifting some restrictions just in the last week. We have a graphic showing about a dozen states. Some, like North Carolina, allowed more fans in the stands. We had more indoor bars being opened and things like this. And you and Dr. Walensky were like, not yet. Why not yet? Why is this week not the week yet to ease restrictions?
Chuck, because we've been in this situation before. When you start to see a decline in number of cases, if you prematurely lift the restrictions, we have a few examples of the rebound back. Our baseline of daily infections now, even though it's way down from where it was 300,000+ per day, is down to around 70,000. That baseline's too high, Chuck. Once you start pulling back, the thing you don't want is to have a plateauing at a level that's so high that inevitably things are going to go back up. And that's the reason why we understand the need and the desire, understandably, to want to just pull back because things are going in the right direction. But you've got to get that baseline down lower than it is now, particularly in light of the fact that we have some worrisome variants that are in places like California and New York and others that we're keeping our eye on. So it's really too premature right now to be pulling back too much.
Let's talk about the big news overnight, the approval of the Johnson & Johnson vaccine. The good news, it's a single shot. But here's where I think some people will have questions. The efficacy rate, and this is where you're going to have to help explain why people should feel just as comfortable with a Johnson & Johnson vaccine as they do a Moderna or Pfizer vaccine, whose efficacy rates on the virus are higher than the Johnson & Johnson. What say you, Dr. Fauci?
Well, Chuck, first of all, you now have 3 highly efficacious vaccines for sure. There's no doubt about that. And particularly the recent results from J&J, if you look at the efficacy against severe disease, greater than 85%, and there have been no hospitalizations or deaths in multiple countries, even in countries that have the variants. So be careful when you try to parse this percent versus that. The only way you know one versus the other if you compare them head to head. And they were not compared head to head. They were compared under different circumstances. All 3 of them are really quite good. And people should take the one that's most available to them. If you go to a place and you have J&J and that's the one that's available now, I would take it. I personally would do the same thing. I think people need to get vaccinated as quickly and as expeditiously as possible. And if I would go to a place where they had J&J, I would have no hesitancy whatsoever to take it.
How do you plan to distribute these vaccines? Are you going to take advantage of the refrigeration aspect of the J&J vaccine? But let me ask this, are you concerned that if you take advantage of that some may say, oh, we're getting the, quote, weaker vaccine?
Well, that's the first thing you've got to dispel, Chuck, apropos of the first question you asked me. It's not the weaker vaccine. They're all 3 really good vaccines. And the distribution are going to be equitably the same way as we distributed the mRNA vaccines from Pfizer and from Moderna. They will be distributed in an equal way to the same way we did it originally with the first 2. We've got to get away from that concept that one's the weaker and one's not. It's understandably when people look at the numbers, but that's really not the case. We have a vaccine that works. We should be really very glad that we do. We're quite fortunate to have 3 really good vaccines.
In fact, let me ask the question in reverse. Is it possible that Moderna and Pfizer efficacy rate, because of the variants now, would actually be slightly lower if they were being under the approval process right now?
It's conceivable. I mean, you don't know, Chuck. I mean, because you have to do the study to get the really firm data, but that certainly is conceivable. And that's the reason why you've got to be careful when you make comparisons. You've got to do them head to head. And again, putting that aside, looking at, I mean, if you had done this and just said months ago, what would really make you very excited, Dr. Fauci? I say, boy, just give me a 70+% effective vaccine. I'd really be thrilled. In fact, I think I may have said that on this show to you.
I think you did. And I was just going to say, is that the line, 70%? Like anything lower than that, would you be a little more hesitant pitching a vaccine?
Well, you know, Chuck, you got to look at the circumstances. You got to look at the subgroups. You got to look at hospitalizations versus deaths. When you look at what the FDA looks for, they look for a vaccine that you target the trial to get something 50% or greater. So this went way over that. I mean, I don't want to parse down like 69, 67. You have to look at the nature of the trial, the people in the trial.
Let me get to vaccinating children, because I had this question today. There's down to 16, there's down to 12, and I guess the question is below 12. And I think on here before you'd seem to think that with older kids, probably before the school year, we would have some clarity on which vaccines are safe. What about for kids under 12?
Correct. Well, when you go to under 12, you got to do something that's called age de-escalation, Chuck, which means you don't want to jump down from 12 down to 6 months. You go 12 to 9, 9 to 6, 2 years to 6, and then 6 months to 2 years. But you've got to do it in a progressive way. There are a couple of companies that are doing that. Some of those studies have actually already started. If you project realistically when we'll get enough data to be able to say that elementary school children will be able to be vaccinated, I would think that would be at the earliest the end of the year, and very likely the first quarter of 2022. But for the high school kids, it looks like sometime this fall. I'm not sure it's exactly be on the first day that school opens, but pretty close to that.
We are at literally about to have the 1 year mark of when, for a lot of Americans, it was Tom Hanks in the NBA that night, right? And we're about to hit that point. We're also going to have spring break. We've got these new variants. What is concerning you? Is it this whole sort of stew that could just percolate right back up on us?
Of course, that's a concern to me, Chuck, and I say that all the time. You don't want to be someone that always keeps the reins on not getting people back to normal. But you can get back to normal more quickly if you keep getting that baseline low. And I'm concerned that we're still at that level of 70,000. And when people start then pulling back on mitigation methods and mitigation activities, you have the risk, and it is a real risk, of seeing it go back up. And it's not something I'm imagining. Go back and take a look at the surges that we've had over the past year. It was always at a time when you wanted to pull back. Remember, during the time when we were going to open up the country and open up the economy, there were some states and some regions and some cities that did not actually abide by the recommendations. They pulled back too prematurely, and we had the big surges that came. We just don't need that right now. We want to get it way down before we do that. We have an advantage too, Chuck, because in addition to seeing the curve going down, every day, every week that goes by, more and more people get vaccinated. That's in our favor to keep these things down.
Herd immunity, when do you think we can say we would get there?
Well, again, herd immunity is a situation that you're going to anticipate as an approximation. We don't know you're in herd immunity until you get to a point where essentially the entire community has this umbrella of protection. And when you get below it, then you start seeing cases. I would imagine, and I make a projection, I think it's reasonable, but I'm not 100% certain, that it's somewhere between 70 and 85% of the population. But before you get to true herd immunity, you could still get a terrific example of getting less and less cases as more and more people get vaccinated. So you don't have to have absolute herd immunity to get those cases way down as you get more and more people vaccinated.
Bottom line, we have 3 vaccines, and it is not yet March 1st. Dr. Fauci, I assume on that score you feel like, in that sense, we're winning.
Well, we certainly have accomplished an awful lot. The one thing, again, that I don't want to seem like I'm always looking at the downside of things, but let's keep a feet on that accelerator right now, because we're going in the right direction. And the right direction is to continue to go down to a very low baseline level. And we're just not there yet, Chuck. We're not.
Dr. Fauci, as always, sir, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Chuck.